Idaho's primary election is set for Tuesday, May 17th. Joining me now at the Pundits table are Stephanie Witt and Jaclyn Kettler of Boise State University to review this week's debate and the upcoming primary. Thanks for joining me.
Happy to be here.
Glad to be here.
So I want to start with you, Stephanie. Attorney General Wasden has been in office for a long time, and the position is typically not one that draws a lot of attention. It used to be more like the comptroller or treasurer's debate that wasn't challenged too much.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we've seen attorneys general throughout the United States taking on a more activist role in regard to challenging laws or helping legislators defend laws that might not pass constitutional muster. And that seems to be at the heart of the conflict between candidate Labrador and Wasden and McComber. How eager are you to defend the legislature's laws that may not pass constitutional muster, or do you take the more, I think Wasden has the more traditional approach of, I just look at the Constitution and evaluate it that way.
It was a very interesting debate on Tuesday night. What were some takeaways?
Yeah, I think the approach that they would take to the office, whether it would be, Wasden's more like I'm using the Constitution to evaluate, to lead the office versus I'm going to be more politically active was very interesting. But as well, like Wasden was mentioning things like the size of the office, managing the office, which is some interesting things to think about because for these statewide positions, managing large offices is actually kind of an important part of the job that doesn't really get talked about very much.
That's right. There's a deputy AG in every agency pretty much. And so you do have quite a number of those attorneys that work under your direction.
And there's an interesting, the candidates in the race, I feel like, demonstrate kind of an interesting stripes of the party. We've got Attorney General Wasden, who's kind of the old guard Republican. He's been sort of the establishment candidate. And then you've got Raul Labrador, who for a long time was one of those insurgent Tea Party folks, but now has some experience. He's been in party leadership at the state level. He was in Congress for 8 years. And then you've got Mr. McComber, who's completely new and running sort of as that outsider candidate.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that is a reflection of at least three of the streams running through the Republican Party right now. Jackie can probably speak better to that.
Well, I do think that it's an interesting look into both kind of the ideological positions, the issues of key, of their top of their agenda, as well as like approaches to campaigning, where we see like McComber and similar candidates taking more grassroots type of outsider type candidacy.
And a lot more active online on the internet too.
Very true, yeah. And Wasden has support of some of the more establishment, but Labrador also getting a lot of support, but including from some of the kind of farther right Republican entities as well. So it'll be really interesting on how in a three-way race, how those kind of differences play a role in voter support.
And it's not the only three-way race this year. We've got a couple of primary debates coming up next week for Superintendent of Public Schools on Monday and then Secretary of State on Tuesday. Is there anything interesting in the superintendent's debate you have your eye on?
Well, I think this is another race where maybe often doesn't get a ton of attention, but given the presence and the salience of education issues across the country, but particularly in Idaho, I think there is a lot of interest in this race. And we've got three candidates who are, like with the incumbent Yarborough, but we've got Critchfield and Durst who are also focusing on some of the kind of major education issues that have been coming up lately. And so I think it'll be interesting to see what issues they're really focusing on in the debate and throughout the rest of their campaigns.
And how much focus do you think there will be on kind of the traditional Idaho metrics we've been talking about, whether it's a go-on rate or enrollment levels versus these sort of nationalized issues like your critical race theory or other such things?
Well, so far, we're hearing a lot more about these hot-button issues that are playing nationally, whether or not critical race theory is, endemic in our schools, and if so, how to root it out. The debates that continue about the Common Core and how to assess the educational goals and objectives in K through 12. I think that's what I'm seeing most about, when I look at the materials from the three. I don't know if that's what the Idaho voting public in general is most concerned about. I think there is definitely a part of the Republican base that is really concerned about critical race theory, I don't know how broadly that's held.
And then similar, talking about sort of these nationalized issues making a foothold into Idaho politics, we also have the Secretary of State's race, where a lot of conversation has been around the 2020 election and election security.
For sure. I mean, this continues to be a big point of discussion in legislatures and similar sort of Secretary of States or other election official races and campaigns since 2020 is about election security, whether or not there's presence of election fraud, which in general there does not appear to be very much fraud, but it continues to be a big issue that's really been focused on. And we're seeing that come out in this race some as well among some of the candidates.
Mm-hmm. It seems like for Dorothy Moon and Mary Souza, the concern is about there is fraud and we need to get rid of it. Whereas McGrain's messaging seems to be, I'm all about election security, but he's not claiming that there was a lot of voter fraud in previous elections, which makes sense. He was in charge of administering elections in Ada County.
Ada County, which is home to a quarter of the state's population already.
That's right.
There are a number of races that we don't have debates scheduled for as well. There's Congressional District 2 with Congressman Simpson and his challenger Brian Smith. There's the lieutenant governor and the governor's races. Why would, whether an incumbent or a challenger, why would a candidate decide not to debate? What sort of advantage do you think they're seeing from that choice this year? Yeah,
there can be a few different kind of motivations that may go into candidates withdrawing from a debate. If you're the incumbent, it could, there's you may have more to lose there if you do debate in terms of getting caught up in saying something that perhaps you didn't mean to say, or just having to discuss issues that you don't think that should be debated. And as the incumbent, you may already have name recognition, right? So you don't really need the time with voters to share what your issues are. You already have that experience. You may have more resources to campaign, those types of things. And so I think where the issue can be is for challengers who aren't getting getting that time to speak with voters.
Mm-hmm. And this is, of course, the first stage in the election cycle. This is only the primary where the parties are nominating their candidates. But Stephanie, you looked into some numbers, and there are a number of instances in Idaho where the primary election is the only one that matters.
Yes, I know people have a variety of opinions about that, but the last time the Democrats succeeded in electing a statewide officer was Marilyn Howard, who was the superintendent of public instruction, whose term ended in 2007. So it's been many years since the Democrats have won one of those races. Now, given that, it does seem to be true that if you want to be part of picking who's going to win, then you need to vote in the Republican primary, because that's where the most likely winners in those statewide races are going to happen. And it is, by the way, the superintendent of public instruction's office where the Democrats tend to get the most votes. They come closest. Usually, in several of the last electoral cycles, they've been they've had 49% of the vote in that race. So they've been pretty close, but they don't win. So if you're not going to have a Democrat win in November, then you better like who's going to win the primary in the Republican primary. So I do think that's where the action is. And we also looked, by the way, at the number of people who were filing for office, and there are 105 seats in the legislature total, and 59 of them have no Democrats running at all. So the the Republican primary is the only election in those cases.
And there has been some discussion in political circles of whether Democrats should stick to their guns and nominate good candidates, whether they should cross over and affiliate with the Republican Party to vote in that primary. Jaclyn, you've looked at some numbers. What have you found as far as party affiliation?
Yeah, I think that is a major challenge, right? For the minority party in a supermajority state, like how do you grow? How do you recruit candidates? How do you grow your voter base? And this year in particular, there have been some encouragement of registered Democrats or unaffiliated voters to register as a Republican. And there does seem to be some movement, not huge numbers, huge changes in number. But I was looking back at the 2018 primary, and since then the Republican Party has gained over 100,000 registered voters. And so when we're looking at that growth in the Republican Party since 2018, there's definitely the potential for some shifts, and that will be really interesting to watch this time around.
And 2018 was the last governor primary, right? So those will be the numbers to compare.
Right, exactly. Yeah, those would be the primaries where you tend to get higher turnout because you've got competitive primary races.
And then we have just about a minute left in the show. I do also want to get to the legislature, not just the statewide races. We've had a redistricting cycle. We've had a lot of announcements. Stephanie, what do you expect is going to be the impact to the legislature this cycle?
I expect to see higher than usual turnover. And I know Jackie has better information on this, but generally we'll see more incumbents having to run against incumbents as the new districts are created. And a few cases where the district is brand new and no incumbent lives there.
Yeah, we've got at least 4 races with incumbents running against each other. We've got several open races. And so while we may not, while we may be lacking Democrats in some races, we're still going to see a sizable turnover, even just from the Republican primaries.